Ja, hallo.
Hello, good morning. I'm very happy you're all awake already. I want to talk with me about AfD at 10:02. And we're going to do that, but we're going to ask ourselves a few questions first. So, as you can see, I wrote this book, Why People Vote for AfD. I've already been introduced. I'm Lisa Starken, I'm a journalist, author. I'm focusing on right-wing extremism, so I write a lot about that. I'm traveling a lot to try and understand why people are so enamored with what AfD is telling them. So it's one of the questions that are important at this time. There's also stage one. At this time, there is a talk about Trump's attack on democracy. And you might think this is a topic that's not only relevant for us in Germany, but everywhere in the world. But especially here for us and due to our history, it's something that's, I don't want to say special, but maybe something that's remarkable. Especially if you ask yourself how the AfD, even though we are all so aware and informed, they still manage to be a part of our everyday life. So much that they are now in the Bundestag with 150 delegates. And a lot of them are obviously neo-Nazis and right-wing extremists, and they get a stage and they normalize right-wing extremism in a way we haven't seen in a long time. And that's where we're at today. What do we do with that? We could say, well, fuck, the next 4 years might decide about what's happening with this democracy, and that's true. And the question that we should ask ourselves is, what about the people that vote for the AfD today? Are they all right-wing extremists? That was said a lot last year. Everybody who votes for the AfD does it because they are fully aware of what that means. But many of these people aren't obviously right-wing extremists, and they see themselves as the center of society. They think that I'm part of the majority with the things that I think and say. And we have to understand how people got to that point where they believe that with right-wing extremist thinking, they still feel comfortable saying, oh, we're part of the majority of society. But all of us in this democracy thought that we were the majority, that you can find democracy in the center and not an authoritarian system. And that's been on my mind in the last year. So I went on a journey and I wanted to talk to the people that vote for the AfD because I wanted to understand where they're coming from, what happened in their life, and where maybe the more democratic forces have lost them. And I thought I'm going to take you along on that, because I didn't just write, but also record it. And I'm going to show you a little video.
Wir brauchen noch Ton.
And based on this journey, I wrote my new book. I spoke to AfD voters across Germany. I spoke to people until the middle of the night, spoke to an older woman who was a member of the AfD, had a piece of cake with her, learned a lot about her life, sat on a balcony with a neighbor and asked him when democratic forces lost his support. I tell stories about my personal interactions with the AfD in my own life. I encountered a lot of anger, hopelessness, rejection of the state, but also many personal stories. Stories that often were something that made sense to me, and sometimes they didn't. It's too easy to say, and misses the point to say that everyone who votes for the AfD has been sucked up by by a far-right whirlwind. I am convinced that if we talk to each other, take something from these interactions, and ensure that fewer people feel rejected and ignored by politics, we will all find back to democracy. And that's exactly what is so important. Just before the elections on February 23rd, all of these interactions created new questions that I also talked about with experts, and everyone agreed that we can make a difference to counter the increasingly strong far right.
Waren ganz viele Szenen.
So what you've seen in this video were many scenes from one of my first travels that I undertook in last year for the state elections in Thuringia and Saxonia. And for me, that was something that really affected me. I'm from North Rhine-Westphalia, from Bielefeld, and this trip was something for me where I learned a lot about the fact how people and their realities of life are being ignored by German policy makers. So no matter where we went, we kind of followed Björn Höcke in his Sommerfest tour. There was like drinks and barbecues and stuff for the kids and small giveaways, little deportation airplanes for the children. And what affected me the most in all of these events that we visited was that we always saw very obvious right-wing extremists. You can tell by the way they're clothed, or if maybe they covered some tattoos, then you know that what's underneath that, maybe a tattoo that's illegal to show in public. And that amount and also and the same amount and differences, I saw different kinds of families. All of you could have been there and it wouldn't have been out of place. And what's interesting is how did the AfD manage to become so normalized that like regular people that think they're part of the middle of society can vote for them. And there's nothing new here. All of these things have been researched. Wilhelm Heidenmeier, one of the leading right-wing extremist experts of Germany, has said in 2002 that if we ignore the realities of life of people, then a right-wing party is going to fill that gap. And that was in 2002. The AfD has been founded 11 years ago this year. So they didn't even have to do a lot. They just had to look at, go on that beaten path that the democratic parties have already trotted for them and focus on the problems they didn't see. So what have they done? They started as a Euro-critical party and then developed towards a more and more right-wing extremist party that they are today. So there was a lot of normalization of extremism happening there, especially in the questions that people ask themselves, always answered with some variation of migration. So the people that vote for the AfD, the questions they ask are the same questions that we ask ourselves, like how do I pay my rent? What happens when I grow old here? Does the pension system work here when I get old enough? What does a good education system look like? Why are school toilets so crappy? Why doesn't public transport work right? And all of these questions get a very simple answer. That simple answer, that is the cure-all, is always migration. We need to limit migration. That's what they answer everything with, find a simple answer to stuff. And why does that work so well? These crises that people feel are combined with others, like inflation, the climate crisis, the war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East, and just generally a lot of anxiety about the future. So this overlap of crises leads to a feeling of being lost and helpless. We don't know what the future is going to look like. Will there be another crisis? Like, what's going to happen with the climate? When will the natural catastrophe happen next? What happens if I put my money in the bank? Is it going to be safe? What is Trump doing in the US? How is this world going to change? So all of these questions, probably all asking ourselves that. And the difference between the people and the difference to the people that say, I want a liberal democracy, is that we value our liberty. But if you have so many crises going on at once, that can lead people to say, I want safety instead. I want somebody who has answers. I want somebody to take the reins and act. And I'm willing to trade the freedom that I had in this liberal democracy, trade it for the feeling of safety and security. And that means delegating responsibility. And if I give that responsibility away for myself and my life, then I'm very quickly ended up in an authoritarian system that says, we're going to take care of you. You're currently invisible in this country. Nobody's seeing your problems, but we see you, we see your issues, and we are going to take care of it. And that's exactly what happened with the AfD. So, of course, that's a summary of what people are talking about. And when we meet them, we often have certain images in our heads that people need to experience the crisis to be affected. But that's not true. They don't have to actually be affected in their lives. They just need to have the feeling that something could maybe happen, that something could be taken away from them, that they might become invisible, that other people are more visible than them in this land. And that's a typical right-wing image that we see again and again. There's always the us, the people, against the foreigners, against the elites, against the people that don't do anything in this country. And every time that we can identify ourselves with we the people, then we look down at the other people, and we don't want them to have what they have, to do what they do or not do. So when we look at politics today, and we think about what do they do with that, because it's not a new thing. People feel unseen. They want more safety. They want more security. They're willing to give up some liberties for that. That's not like a recent invention. Even the research on that has been going on since the 80s. So there's at least 45, probably more years of this development. And politics would need to just do a few things that seem very obvious, like visions for the future. Think about what they actually want to do with this country. Communicate how they want to tackle problems. But instead what happened, and that's interesting, and that's something that wasn't quite clear in the video that you've seen before, is what happened in the run-up to the election. It was very typical. When in November, when it became clear that we're going to have a new election cycle, Friedrich Merz and the other parties said, no problem, we're going to focus on the economy. We're going to talk about the topics that are really important for this country. How can we raise investments for this country? How do we talk about the economy? And in the end, they were talking about migration. Again, we spoke only about migration. And we did that in a way as if even there, migration was the cure-all for all the issues in this country. As if you could solve everything by just limiting immigration. And these stories just become perpetuated. Women on the street that I spoke to, when I asked them, why do you vote for AfD? How can I vote AfD as a woman? They're misogynistic, they're not feminist. Why would a woman choose to vote for them? So none of what they claim to want is going to be good for you. And they all said the same thing. It's a little bit as if you were caught in a TikTok loop. They always said, AfD protects me from violence by migrants, by migrant men. And that's the story that you can apply to all groups of people. They invented their own story for every audience, why only with AfD they can be secure. For women, it's migrant men. You cannot be safe if you go out alone. That's why you need to vote for us. That maybe women aren't safe from men in general is maybe the bigger issue, and most violence happens in the domestic sphere. So you can see that AfD calculates. They take a part of a truth, women are afraid of men, and they turn it into a distilled new truth. Women cannot go out alone at night because the migrant man with a knife is just waiting for them. And you can apply that for all kinds of groups. Why do people with a migration background vote for AfD? How can I vote for a party that actually kind of wants me to leave the country? And they all said, well, there's a difference. There's a difference between me, who's been here for a long time, and the person that's only been here since maybe 2015. So there is a form of identity politics here that put people, groups of people against each other. And I think there's one fact that we need to let go of when we talk about right-wing extremism or society as a whole. Women can be misogynists. People with a migration background can be anti-migration. Lesbian women can be queer haters. And this has a name. It's group-related misanthropy. And I can find certain people very nice, but still, on the whole, say I don't like this group. And this is something that we realize every day in the society, and why the stopping migration is treated as this cure, because we're all trapped in this spiral. Some are more susceptible to it than others. And that's what happened in this election cycle. I need to quickly check the time here. Why does it happen? So science clearly says it could be so easy. The parties would just simply need to talk about their own visions for the future, which they obviously have. You just have to look at the programs, because they have ideas what they could do about pensions, about the education system, but we don't know anything about it because they're not talking about it. Why don't they talk about it? Why do they go to talk shows and they keep talking about buzzwords? Migration, 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 the thing that doesn't help anybody and doesn't solve any problems. And there's a scientific theory there as well. The more conservatives and other parties keep kind of jumping that hurdle, it's always strengthening the original. So Friedrich Merz said, well, I don't think so. I'm going to continue. And you can see from the election outcome that science was right. Every time conservatives pick up the talking points of right-wing extremists, they actually strengthen the original. The CDU was at 30% of votes in November, and they landed at a very different point in the actual election. More than 1 million of CDU voters went to AfD. More than 700,000 people from the Social Democrats went to AfD. And so you can see clearly that they did not feel like the stuff that the established parties talked about actually cares for them, that it's a future vision that they can get behind. So they looked at AfD and they said, I'd rather go with the original that's been saying this whole time. So that's something we need to think about as a society, especially in the next 4 years when we think about how politics works today, can work today. Because what can we do about it? There's a second aspect here. And it's that not just politics talk about it, but also the media. How do we talk about that? How do we talk about AfD? How do we talk about what they do? When you look at that also in the coming election, there's just a few things that I need to tell you, and you will immediately know who said that. We're going to tear down the wind power plants. That was Alice Weidel who said that at the Bundesparteitag, the constitution session for the AfD. At the same time, the Social Democrats were speaking, including the former Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. So you'd think that they would come first in the media because they were the ruling party at the time, but they weren't even mentioned in the news that day. So the most important question is, what has the media said about that? They said Alice Weidel wants to tear down the wind power plants. Everybody's clicking it. Everybody's enraged. That's the feeling that AfD keeps triggering in us, especially in social media. It's clickbait. It's attention economy. It leads us to be enraged, and it sticks in our minds. And the only way out of that is to combine these messages with political information, because none of these headlines actually mentioned, well, we cannot do that. You cannot just tear down any power plant, any wind power plant, like Alice Weidel just imagines. It's just not possible. And you can see this what we call it nationally, the Trump playbook, because often we think right-wing extremists, they're stupid, but they're pretty smart. They know exactly what to say. Everything they do and say is scripted, it's calculated, and that's exactly how it's supposed to feel for us. Simple messages that stay on your mind. It's whether it's wind power or any other thing that I don't want to repeat here on the stage. When women say, I cannot go out at night because of migrants, then that's what the AfD has claimed. It's not a fact, it's not real. And the only solution that we would have for both the media and politics is to just increase political education. by always saying, what's behind this message? Why would they say that? How does she do it? What does she look like when she does it? And what's the goal here? And when we understand that, then the message behind it is kind of ridiculous, because then you can look at it and say, yeah, sure, no, this doesn't affect me because it's obviously bullshit. And when you reach that point, we're out of the spiral of rage, and people need to realize that and get out of it in Germany. So before we get to questions, the reality check for you at home is maybe AfD is at more than 20% of votes. It's leading in some of the surveys, and maybe you know a few people personally that say, well, this country is going downhill fast. I'm going to vote for the AfD because they're going to save me. If you don't know them, I promise you there is a person, because the AfD has left their bubbles. The normalization of right-wing extremism, we now have more people talking about it. And maybe you're losing hope because you think politics is not something you can influence in the next 4 years. The media, maybe you're part of, or maybe not. But there's one thing that's even more important that each of us can do, and that is talking to each other again. That we discuss with each other again and challenge people in these situations. Ask them, how do you get to that opinion? Because the only fact that exists is to build emotional relationships with people. If people have an emotional anchor in democracy, then they can find a way back to it. If they don't have this anchor, then it's almost impossible to get them out of the spiral of right-wing thinking. Then we as individuals are powerless. But that means there's 3 things we can do today that I want to close with, and there's 3 things you can do. Last year, Correctiv uncovered some AfD plans. We all went to the streets. I was a protest. I did something for democracy, and that was very important. Lots of critical voices said, okay, but then what happened afterwards? It didn't lead anywhere. And it actually did. Lots of people politicized themselves. They joined organizations, maybe parties, and that means step 1, keep involving yourself. Speak to people, in your emotional relationships, in the place you live. Try to get involved and try to change things. The second point, political education should be part of the breakfast table. If you have children, talk to them. They ask the best questions. And if you just go along with these questions, then you understand quickly what we need to do in political education. And the third most important thing, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So right-wing extremism is not going to go away so quickly in our society. It's going to stay around. It might grow. It might shrink. It depends on what politics and us as the civil society are going to do in the next 4 years. But that means look at yourself, look at where your limits are, see what you can do and what you cannot do, so you can sustain this engagement. And these are the important things that we can do, that I want to leave you with. Everything else is in the book. The stories of the people are in the book. We need to understand, we need to listen, and then we need to discuss again. And I'm happy that if you have questions, feel free to ask them now.
Okay, over there. Hi, Sally. Hi, Bob. I would like to come back to these personal meetings and interactions. Did you have the feeling that people who spoke to you maybe could actually return, or did you perceive differences in terms of the things that he's saying right now really clearly show that he is not going to return to democratic discourse? Yeah, thanks for asking that. There are definitely huge differences. I try to only speak to people who describe themselves as being part of the middle of society, the center of society. That kind of implies that we can get them back as if they didn't have any responsibility for that. But many of these people voted for someone else before they started voting AfD. In a lot of cases, that was the Conservatives or the Social Democratic Party. So these parties need to ask themselves very seriously, when did we lose these people? And when we start addressing these questions very seriously, then we can win these people back. There are actually two recent studies. One was by Greenpeace that found that wherever there is very little public transit, people vote for the AfD. And so that's shows very clearly when things change in your real everyday life, then you can also change your political position. I think that's really a long process, and there's a lot of shame associated with changing your position and essentially distancing yourself from a position you have today. It's a lot more difficult with people who explicitly describe themselves as right-wing extremists. So people who are really drawn into that and getting those people out, that's not something civil society can solve. Maybe one last question. Yeah, hi Sally. I wanted to ask how you presented and introduced yourself in these conversations, because I feel like a lot of times in these conversations, in these academic circles, people don't actually talk to these voters. And so I wanted to ask how you introduced yourself. Did you say that you were a journalist? Yeah, that's also a very good question. I actually did a coaching with a psychologist before, because as a journalist, I'm used to always asking why. Why would you vote for the AfD? They're far right wing. But then you never get into a conversation. It's what was really important for me was really entering their lived realities. I went to markets. I went to election campaigns, election campaign events, and so I spoke to them very openly. I described this project to them and said that I was writing this book and wanted to tell their stories. And I would say in 95% of cases that worked. So I would just be standing or sitting with someone there for hours, and they told me everything. That's this basic principle of open questions. That's something we can all learn. And that before we try to know that we we need to have this open conversation. Oh, okay. And so my role was really just listening and trying to understand what were the problems that they were dealing with in that moment. It's not like they were finding answers with the AfD, but the question what I tried to figure out was which problems were they looking for answers for. And so it really was about entering the lived reality. That worked really well because they felt safe. People need to feel safe in their habitat. I can't just do these interviews these vox pops on the street, because people might be insecure, they might not feel safe, yeah. Thank you so much. So Lisa Starken, this is your round of applause.